Hey there, welcome to Night Lectures, your daily dose of fascinating stories. His name was Ferdinand Magellan. He was born in Portugal and served at the royal court. But when his homeland turned its back on him, he did not give up. Instead, he went to the King of Spain with a daring proposal to reach the east by sailing west. What made a Portuguese nobleman join the Spaniards? How did he persuade the king to send him toward lands where no European had ever set foot? Why did a mutiny break out at the very start of the voyage? Where did he find the strait that forever changed the map of the world? And why did Magellan himself never live to see the triumph? In this video, the full story of the first circumnavigation in history. We will tell how ships and crews perished, how sailors wandered for months in the silence of the Pacific Ocean, and how a single ship returned home, completing the impossible. Share your ideas for future videos in the comments and hit the subscribe button. New bedtime stories come out here daily. Ferdinand Magellan was born in the year 1480 in northern Portugal in a small village called Sabrosa, nestled in the hilly region of Trás-os-Montes among vineyards, olive groves, and narrow stone roads. His family belonged to the lesser nobility, noble enough to be considered people of honor, but not wealthy enough to give their children an easy life. His father, Rodrigo de Magalhães, served as an alcaide, a royal administrator responsible for law, order, and tax collection in the district. His mother, Alda de Mesquita, came from a respected local family, and through her kinship Ferdinand received the chance to gain a solid education from an early age. In the Magellan household, learning was valued. The boy learned to read and write, mastered the basics of arithmetic, listened to lessons from the local parish priest, and studied the catechism and Latin prayers. Yet his childhood was not locked within books. He helped his father with administrative duties, joined in hunting, and listened to stories told by merchants and soldiers passing through the village. Stories about distant lands rich with spices and gold, about people of different skin colors and different gods. These tales stirred his imagination and gradually nurtured his desire for faraway journeys. When Ferdinand was about 12 years old, his family sent him to the court of Queen Leonor, widow of King John II, who still lived at the court of the new monarch, Manuel I. In Lisbon, the young Magellan began his service as a page. This was a serious test for him. He left his rural home and entered a world of courtly nobility, strict manners, elaborate etiquette, and constant talk of politics and oceanic expeditions. At court, he continued his education, learning fencing, horsemanship, geography, astronomy, navigation, and the basics of cartography. Science is especially vital in Portugal during the age of great discoveries. At that time, Lisbon lived by the sea. The harbor was full of sails, the markets overflowed with spices and silks, and the court was abuzz with talk of overseas conquests. Bartolomeu Dias had already rounded the Cape of Good Hope, Vasco da Gama had reached India, and King Manuel dreamed of making Portugal the ruler of the Indian Ocean. The young page, though not from an influential house, absorbed everything connected with seafaring and, according to contemporaries, showed exceptional diligence and attention to detail. By the year 1505, at the age of 25, Magellan entered military and naval service. He joined the fleet commanded by Francisco de Almeida, the first viceroy of Portuguese India. This armada was equipped with special care. It was to defend Portugal's interests in India and lay the foundations for a permanent military presence there. The fleet crossed the Atlantic, rounded Africa, passed Mozambique and Zanzibar, and finally reached the western coast of the Indian subcontinent, where Magellan faced his first real trials. He took part in sea skirmishes with Moorish ships, escorted merchant convoys along the Malabar coast, guarded Portuguese trading posts in Canner and Cochin, and served in garrisons. Year by year, he came to understand that true power in those lands belonged to those who controlled the fleets. Later, in 1510, Magellan sailed again to India, this time with Afonso de Albuquerque, a bold and ruthless commander who captured Goa and made it the capital of Portuguese India. A crucial episode in Magellan's career came in 1511 during the campaign in Malacca, a city that controlled trade between China, Java, and India. The assault on Malacca was fierce. The Portuguese met heavy resistance, streets were barricaded, and every house had to be fought for. During the battle, Magellan was struck in the leg by a spear, an injury that, according to chroniclers, plagued him for the rest of his life and gave him a permanent limp. Witnesses said he was brave and composed, keeping calm even in the worst moments of the fight. For his service, he was rewarded with slaves, a share of the spoils, and official thanks, but not promotion. Returning to Portugal in 1512, Magellan was a veteran who had taken part in 3 expeditions to India, gained combat experience and navigational skill, and formed his own view of colonial policy. Yet at court his merits went unrecognized. His pay was cut, no new appointments followed, and when he requested a promotion and compensation for his wounds in Malacca, he was refused. It was then that the feeling of injustice took root in him, the realization that his homeland no longer valued his service. When Ferdinand Magellan returned to Portugal around 1513 after his campaigns in India and Southeast Asia, he possessed considerable military and nautical experience. He had fought under Francisco de Almeida, stormed Malacca under Afonso de Albuquerque, commanded small detachments, been wounded in battle, and was known as a capable and disciplined officer. Yet on returning home, he found no gratitude, no promotion, no recognition. Instead, he met indifference. His pay was delayed, his petitions were ignored, and the royal administration shut its doors. King Manuel I continued Portugal's eastern expansion, but preferred to entrust commands to high-born nobles, not to provincial officers without patrons. For Magellan, from an impoverished noble family without courtly allies, this meant exclusion from the empire's future ventures. The tension grew in 1514 when Magellan joined the campaign in Morocco and was wounded during a sortie. Upon his return, he requested an increase in pay as compensation, submitting multiple petitions. Around the same time, he became entangled in a dispute over the delivery of horses, an incident misinterpreted as insubordination. Though the investigation found no guilt, the episode cooled his relations with the royal bureaucracy. Magellan tried to defend his name. He filed new appeals, cited his service record, and pointed to his bravery in Malacca. But his voice carried little weight among more powerful rivals. After yet another refusal in 1517, he made a decision few dared to make, to leave Portugal and offer his services to Spain, Lisbon's greatest maritime rival. He did not do it publicly. He made no speeches, no dramatic gestures. He simply left, departing the capital that had ceased to notice him, and traveling to Seville, where a new chapter of his life would begin. There, in Andalusia, he joined a nation eager to challenge Portugal's monopoly on eastern trade routes. He was not alone. Another Portuguese, the scholar and astronomer Rui Falero, brilliant but volatile, joined him. Together they began drafting a plan for an expedition that might capture the attention of the Castilian court. Their proposal was bold but logical. Under the Treaty of Tordesillas of 1494, Spain was forbidden to sail east toward India. That zone belonged to Portugal. But if one could reach the Moluccas by sailing west around the New World and prove they lay within Spain's hemisphere, then the Spanish crown could claim a share of the spice trade without violating the treaty. To make the plan real, they needed ships, legal backing, precise astronomical calculations, and above all, royal approval. Their first step was to approach Juan de Aranda, an influential official in Seville's Casa de la Contratación, the House of Trade. Aranda saw promise in their idea and agreed to present it to King Charles I. In early 1518, Magellan traveled to Valladolid, where the young king resided. Charles, though only 18, already showed interest in expanding Spain's overseas power. Speaking before him, Magellan was calm but confident. He displayed a chart of the proposed route, explained his knowledge of a possible southern passage through the New World, cited reports of a strait, and promised to lead a Spanish fleet to the Spice Islands without breaking the treaty with Portugal. Charles listened attentively. After consulting his advisors, Castilians, Flemings, and Genoese, he approved the proposal. In March 1518, the Capitulación de Valladolid was signed, a royal contract granting Magellan command of the expedition on behalf of Spain. He was given the title of Adelantado, a promise of 1/10 of all profits from new lands, administrative authority in discovered territories, and supreme command of the fleet. Rui Falero was named chief navigator. After signing, Magellan received Spanish citizenship and became officially known as Fernando de Magallanes. He settled in Seville and began preparations for the voyage. He had no ships, no crew, and no funds yet. All of that still lay ahead. Behind him remained forever the country he had served faithfully and that had turned away from him when he most needed support. After the signing of the Capitulación in Valladolid, Ferdinand Magellan returned to Seville vested with powers few foreigners ever held under the Spanish crown. Acting on behalf of King Charles I, he now carried the royal commission to organize an expedition to the Moluccas, by sailing west beyond Portuguese territory. In the months ahead, he had to assemble a fleet, purchase supplies, recruit crews, secure funds, and above all, maintained control over a project viewed with deep suspicion by Spanish officers. Seville, his new home, was the principal port of Castile's Atlantic trade. In the shipyards of Triana and the warehouses along the Guadalquivir River, there was constant motion, day and night. Ships departed for the Americas. Others returned laden with cocoa, hides, gold, and letters describing strange new lands. Those who ran this commerce valued discipline, timing, and authority, and it was here that Magellan began building his fleet. 5 ships were assigned to the expedition, differing in size and condition. Trinidad, the flagship, strong and well-armed, on which Magellan himself would sail. San Antonio, the largest vessel, suitable for carrying heavy stores and equipment. Concepcion, a lighter ship of medium tonnage, good for maneuvering. Victoria, a sturdy caravel whose destiny would become legendary. Santiago, the smallest, suited for coastal exploration. Recruiting the crew was difficult. Castilian sailors were reluctant to serve under a foreign commander, so men were gathered from many provinces: Andalusians, Basques, Galicians, Flemings, Italians, and a few exiled Portuguese. Among them were both volunteers and convicts, promised pardon in exchange for service. In the end, about 240 men joined the fleet. Some captains appointed by the Council of the Indies caused particular concern. Juan de Cartagena, commanding San Antonio, was not just a captain but an official observer for the crown, and his arrogance toward Magellan was evident from the start. Gaspar de Quesada and Luis de Mendoza, captains of other ships, also believed leadership should belong to Spaniards. None regarded Magellan's mission as their own, and their silent opposition would soon become open defiance. Rui Falero's unstable mind, prone to rage and melancholy, led to his removal before departure, leaving Magellan sole commander. This cost him a friend but granted him full authority. Magellan oversaw every detail himself. He hired several skilled pilots, among them Antonio Pigafetta, a Venetian who would later become the expedition's chronicler. Another recruit was Juan Sebastián Elcano, a Basque seaman once ruined by debt, seeking redemption. At that time, a mere sailor. But Magellan quietly noted his competence. Navigational instruments were purchased at the Casa de la Contratación: astrolabes, compasses, quadrants, sandglasses, and maps, both public and secret charts reserved for officers. As they were to cross uncharted seas, accuracy was paramount. Errors could be fatal. In August 1519, the fleet left Seville and slowly drifted down the Guadalquivir River. Crews slept on deck waiting for tides. At Sanlúcar de Barrameda they remained nearly a month, while final inspections were made and the winds turned favorable. It was there, at the river's mouth, that Magellan held his final meeting with the captains. His voice was firm, without threats. He spoke of duty, loyalty to the crown, and the value of every sailor's life, but also of the discipline without which the voyage would fail. The response was cold. The opposition did not vanish. It merely sank deeper. And yet, on the morning of the 20th of September, 1519, the ships raised anchor. To the sound of prayers and bells, before crowds gathered on the shore, 5 vessels, one after another, glided toward the ocean. Castilian flags fluttered on the masts. In the holds lay sacks of flour, coils of rope, barrels of water and wine. On deck stood men whose names history had not yet learned, and only one of them truly knew where he was headed and how far that edge of the world would be. On the 20th of September, 1519, 5 ships under Ferdinand Magellan's command left Sanlúcar de Barrameda and sailed into the Atlantic Ocean. None of the men standing on those decks knew the voyage would last almost 3 years and lead to the first circumnavigation in history. During the first weeks, everything went well. The wind was favorable, provisions were sufficient, the flotilla held a tight formation, and the sailors, still not yet exhausted by cramped holds and monotonous food, kept up their spirits. The ship steered south along the coast of Africa and then crossed the Atlantic. By November, the expedition reached the shores of South America. In early December, they entered a picturesque bay at the mouth of the river later called Rio de Janeiro. There, Magellan permitted a layover. The ships rode at anchor, the crews rested, carried out minor repairs, and replenished fresh water and produce. Trade with the local inhabitants was lively. Knives, mirrors, and cloth were exchanged for fruit, meat, fish, and timber. The atmosphere felt almost peaceful, at least as peaceful as a voyage of this kind could be. After Rio, the fleet continued farther south. In January 1520, they explored the mouth of the Rio de la Plata, hoping to find a passage westward. The geography, a wide estuary, brackish water, a strong current, gave hope, but it soon became clear this was not a strait, merely another watery dead end. Disappointed, Magellan ordered the Voyage to proceed along the coast, now into little-known southern latitudes where the shoreline grew harsher, the winds sharper, and the weather unstable. In March 1520, as autumn came to the southern hemisphere, the expedition reached a deep, sheltered bay, later named San Julian. Recognizing that pushing on amid strengthening storms would bring losses, Magellan decided to winter there. The decision was prudent but not popular. Cold, idleness, a shortage of fresh food, and general fatigue stoked irritation, and the growing dissatisfaction with Magellan's authority began to take organized form. The ringleaders were Juan de Cartagena, captain of the San Antonio, Gaspar de Quesada, commanding the Concepcion, and Luis de Mendoza, captain of the Victoria. Cartagena had already shown open disloyalty, insisting that a Portuguese could not command Spanish ships single-handedly. Now, taking advantage of the isolation in the bay, he moved decisively. By night, the mutineers raised the flag of defiance. Cartagena's and Quesada's ships refused orders, and on the Victoria, Mendoza effectively deposed the senior officer loyal to Magellan. Though left with only 2 ships, the Trinidad and the Santiago, Magellan acted with resolve. He did not wait for events to unfold. He organized a lightning seizure of the Victoria. On the night of the 1st to the 2nd of April, officers loyal to him, including Juan Serrano and Gomez de Espinosa, boarded with armed men and took the mutineers by surprise. Mendoza was killed while resisting, and control of the Victoria passed to Magellan. This was the turning point. Regaining the Victoria restored the balance. The next day, by a sudden attack and the threat of artillery, the remaining ships were brought back under control. Cartagena and Quesada were arrested. A drumhead court-martial examined the circumstances of the revolt. Gaspar de Quesada was found guilty of armed insurrection and sentenced to death. He was beheaded on the shore near the camp in full view of the mustered crew. Cartagena, because of his connections with the Council of the Indies, was spared execution, but Magellan ordered him marooned in a desolate place with no means of return, together with the cleric Pedro Sanchez de la Revesa, who had supported the mutiny. Their fate is unknown. After crushing the mutiny, Magellan restored strict order. He reassessed the officers' loyalties, annulled prior agreements, enforced a rigid hierarchy, and tightened discipline. The whole crew swore fealty to him as supreme commander. It was a risky but necessary step. Without unity of command, the expedition stood no chance against what lay ahead. The trials continued nonetheless. Soon after these events, the Santiago was sent to reconnoiter the southern coast. The ship departed the bay but was shattered on rocks in a storm. The crew survived, and after trekking tens of kilometers on foot, were found and brought back to camp. The loss was a stark reminder. In these latitudes, a single mistake could cost the entire expedition. Magellan did not know where the strait lay, nor whether it existed at all. But when spring came, the ice retreated, and the weather improved. He ordered the fleet to prepare for sea. In late October 1520, the ships weighed anchor and again headed south, toward an unknown coast where, he hoped, a gateway to the great ocean would open. In late October 1520, the 4 surviving ships under Magellan's command left San Julian and moved south again. It was spring, yet the southern latitudes still greeted them with sharp winds, snow, and penetrating damp. One ship, the Santiago, had already been lost on reconnaissance. The San Antonio, Concepcion, Victoria, and flagship Trinidad struggled along a bleak, cliff-lined shore that seemed endless. Tension among the officers mounted. More than 1 year had passed since sailing from Spain, supplies were dwindling, and the promised strait linking the 2 oceans remained unfound. On the 21st of October, the ships reached a stretch of coast where a high headland, later named Cabo Virgenes, formed a narrow entrance into a bay. From the masthead, a helmsman who had climbed aloft sighted water bending far into the land. After a brief council, Magellan ordered them in. He believed this might be the long-sought passage, a link between the Atlantic and the other seas known only by conjecture. What first looked like a simple bay soon became a winding, rocky, changeable channel whose shores showed little sign of life. Slopes rose sheer, rocky escarpments threw long shadows over gray water, gusts tore down from the heights and made sail handling perilous. Despite the danger, the flotilla pressed on. The channel narrowed and widened, side inlets, branches, and islets appeared at every bend. They constantly had to heave to, lower boats, take soundings, and search out a safe line. More than once the ships were forced to separate, some holding the main channel while others probed side passages. In this setting came one of the expedition's darkest episodes, the desertion of the San Antonio. Though Juan de Cartagena was nominal captain, practical control lay with the pilot Esteban Gomez, an experienced sailor secretly hostile to Magellan. Seizing a moment when the others were out of sight, Gomez ordered a turnabout. The San Antonio left the strait, reached the open sea, and made for Spain. On board were charts, documents, and logs, everything that could reveal the expedition's plan. It was more than flight. It was betrayal, threatening not only the fleet's fate, but also the Crown's political support for the project. Magellan learned of the desertion after several days, when the San Antonio failed to appear at the agreed rendezvous. He did not attempt a search. The situation demanded caution. The remaining ships continued through the treacherous, sinuous channel. The passage took almost 38 days. Men worked at the limits of their strength, trimming sails and crosswinds, clambering ashore to scout, keeping watch, and sketching the route. The strait's width varied from about 2 to 5 kilometers. Depths were irregular, the current strong and unpredictable. At times, the water rose abruptly, and the ships had to wade out the surges and coves. On other days, fog smothered the way, and only the pilot's skill prevented the reefs from claiming the hulls. Exhaustion spread among the crews. Some men developed fevers brought on by damp and cold. Frostbite, weakness, quarrels below, and fits of hysteria on deck became more frequent. Contrary to the later legend of his aloofness, Magellan was active. He visited each ship, held councils, issued personal instructions to the pilots, and encouraged his officers. He knew that if the men broke now, midway through the strait, everything would be lost. At last, in late November, another sea opened ahead. On the 28th of November, 1520, the ships cleared the final rocky rim. Beyond it lay a horizon even and calm, without storms or thunderheads. Sailors who had endured weeks of squalls, iced over lines, and a merciless roll felt steady wind and level water for the first time in many days. This was a different ocean. Magellan stood long and silent on the stern of the Trinidad, gazing at the boundless blue without giving order or speech. Only after a while did he speak its name. Mar Pacifico, the Pacific Ocean. Not because it was peaceful by nature, but because after mutiny, wreck, and betrayal, the very idea of calm felt like a miracle. A mass of thanksgiving was said on board. Some prayed, others stood motionless, staring into the water. None knew that ahead lay not days, as they hoped, but long, harrowing months. Yet at that moment, the victory was complete. The strait had been found, traversed, and crossed, for the first time in history. Beyond it began the great ocean. When, on the 28th of November, 1520, the three remaining ships, Trinidad, Concepcion, and Victoria, emerged from the southern strait Magellan had opened and turned west, a new and hardest phase began. It was not a battle with an enemy or a struggle against a storm. It was a trial of time, silence, and wasting hunger that gnawed at every ship and every man. At first, all seemed favorable. The waters of the new ocean were extraordinarily calm. No hurricanes, no squalls, no heavy swell. The wind held steady. The course was sure, and sailors accustomed to the Atlantic's whims and the strait's fury took the quiet as a good omen. Magellan named the sea Mar Pacifico, the Pacific, not because it would always be gentle, but because here, after mutinies, deaths, and treachery, the ships at last moved without nature's resistance. For the first week, everything went as well as possible. The ships held a westerly course, hoping to reach the Moluccas within a month, but with each passing day it became clearer. There were no birds, no cloud lines, no sense of land, nothing to suggest shore nearby. The sun climbed high, the heat grew, fresh water spoiled, and provisions dwindled faster than expected. The food failed first. Barrels of salted meat rotted from heat, damp, and time. Bread had long since run out. The flour had gone musty. Men ate anything that still resembled food: dried fish, remnants of rice, boiled hides, and crumbs of hard cheese. Later, as Antonio Pigafetta would write, sailors boiled sawdust, softened leather, and even rotten straps from the rigging to quiet their hunger. Scurvy began to hollow out the crews. First bleeding gums, then teeth lost, then exhaustion, edema, and death. Bodies weakened, fingers went numb, knees buckled under the slightest strain. Day after day, 2 or 3 bodies sewn in canvas were committed to the sea. On some ships, the hands could no longer perform their duties. Strength sufficed only to keep the vessels afloat. Officers took watches, carpenters replaced helmsmen, pilots cooked for the survivors, if what simmered in the clay pots could be called food. And all of it unfolded in silence. No storms, no thunder, no sounds from shore. Only the creak of masts, the rare cry of a bird, and the breath of exhausted men. According to Pigafetta, during the entire crossing they did not find a single large island where they could land. Once a strip of land appeared on the horizon, but it proved barren and girdled by knife-edged reefs. They could not replenish supplies. More than a month passed, then a second. Men stopped counting days. Even officers lost their sense of time. The pilots tried to maintain the course, but their figures diverged. Dead reckoning, based on speed, wind angle, and the sun's height, crept off. An error of 1 mile a day became hundreds over 3 months, and no one knew how far they remained from their goal. Magellan remained restrained. He continued to perform his duties as commander, walking the decks, speaking with the pilots, calling brief councils of officers. In public he betrayed no doubt, though, as Pigafetta later wrote. The captain of the Trinidad showed the marks of exhaustion in his eyes. He did not resort to brutality. Instead, he tried to hold the crews together by example. He kept silence when all was silent and spoke only to encourage or to give a precise order. In early March 1521, 3 months and 1 day after leaving the Strait, a lookout on the Concepcion cried out from his watch, "Land on the horizon." At first no one believed him, but within an hour the coastline became clear. It was an island, not barren or perilous, but alive, green, with beaches and springs. Men stared, unbelieving at the nearing shore. It was Guam, one of the Marianas. They landed at once. Men rushed to the water and drank until they collapsed on the sand. Coconut palms were felled, roots were dug, fruit was gathered. In a day the crews recovered more strength than in the previous weeks. A few died ashore. The body could not bear the sudden shift from starvation to food, but the rest returned to life. The island was inhabited, and though the first meeting brought misunderstandings and even a conflict over a stolen boat, it did not turn into a clash. What mattered to the crews was water, food, and rest, and these they obtained. Behind them lay the greatest open ocean passage in the history of seamanship, without stops, without landfall, without storms, but filled with silence and hunger. The Pacific had been crossed, from South America to the islands of Asia, and yet the most important trials were still to come. After the grueling months-long passage across the Pacific Ocean and a brief stop at the island of Guam, the 3 remaining ships under Ferdinand Magellan's command continued west in search of the Moluccas. In the middle of March 1521, the flotilla approached one of the large islands later called Samar and put ashore on the leaf-covered, palm-fringed beach of nearby Homonhon. There, on the 16th of March, the sailors set up a temporary camp to let the exhausted crews rest, gather food, and repair the rigging. It was here that the first meetings with the local inhabitants took place. Bamboo canoes soon came alongside the boat anchored near the shore, islanders holding spears but without hostility. Serving as interpreter was Enrique of Malacca, Magellan's enslaved servant who, as it turned out, could understand the local tongue or at least a dialect close to it. Through him it became clear that nearby, on the island of Limasawa, ruled Raja Colambu, a respected man inclined to trade and open to negotiation. Magellan immediately arranged the crossing. Raja Colambu welcomed the Europeans amicably. He received gifts of cloth, metal goods, and ornaments, and in return offered food, water, and guides. Contact turned into alliance. On the 31st of March 1521, the first Mass on Philippine soil was celebrated on Limasawa, outdoors on the shore, in the presence of Europeans and local chiefs. For Magellan, it was symbolic. His expedition had not only crossed an ocean, it had entered a new world not by the sword, but by the word. From Limasawa, the fleet sailed to the island of Cebu, populous, commercial, and politically significant, ruled by Raja Humabon, a powerful and pragmatic leader. Magellan understood that for the expedition's success, and for establishing Spanish influence in the archipelago, he needed the support of the local elite. He staged a ceremonial reception. He displayed artillery and muskets and presented weapons, cloth, mirrors, and ornaments. Impressed by the Europeans' technological superiority and eager to strengthen his own position among other chiefs, Humabon agreed not only to an alliance, but also to baptism. On the 14th of April, 1521, Raja Humabon was baptized under the name Carlos, and his wife as Juana, in honor of the Spanish royal couple. About 800 others followed. A wooden cross was raised, mass was celebrated, and a feast was held. Magellan believed the alliance with Cebu was now bound not only by treaty, but by a shared faith. But this step had consequences. The powerful chief Lapu-Lapu, ruler of the neighboring island of Mactan, refused to submit to Humabon and rejected Magellan's offer of baptism. Moreover, he made it clear he recognized neither Cebu's authority nor that of foreign newcomers. Humabon asked Magellan to punish the defiant neighbor. Wishing to demonstrate strength and consolidate his missionary success, Magellan agreed. He decided to go to Mactan not with the entire flotilla, but with a detachment of about 50 armed Spaniards and a small number of Cebuano allies. Confident that a sudden appearance would suffice, he failed to account for the terrain. Early on the 27th of April, the detachment approached the shore, but the ships could not come close. Reefs and shallow water prevented the use of artillery. The Spaniards were forced to wade ashore in heavy armor under a blazing sun, and a few hundred meters from the beach met several hundred well-armed warriors of Lapu-Lapu, already prepared for defense. At first, Magellan issued calm orders, urging his men not to fire needlessly. He hoped to intimidate quickly. The attack faltered. The Cebuano allies fell back. The Spaniards, stuck in the shallows where armor hindered movement, began to lose formation. Lapu-Lapu, exploiting his numerical superiority and mobility, encircled them. A merciless melee began. Magellan, remaining in the line, covered the retreat. He fought with his sword, was wounded in the leg, lost his footing, and, falling into the water, became an easy target. He was surrounded. According to eyewitnesses, he did not beg for mercy but could no longer withdraw. Spear and blade struck him again and again. The Spaniards could not recover his body. They were driven back to the boats. Magellan's corpse remained on the shore. A few days later, Humabon offered a ransom, but Lapu-Lapu refused to return the remains. Thus ended the life of Ferdinand Magellan, a man who had journeyed from the shores of Portugal to the far side of the world, who had discovered a strait, crossed the Pacific, and was the first European to forge alliance with the peoples of the East. He died not in a storm and not of disease, but on a foreign shore, in battle, in armor, among people to whom he was a conqueror rather than a herald of faith. Yet the voyage did not end. The flotilla remained. Those who still hoped to return remained. And one goal remained: to close the circle. After Magellan's death off Mactan, the expedition fell into deep disarray. The flotilla had lost not only its commander, but the single authority that had united a heterogeneous crew and held together its discipline, course, and sense of purpose. For several days, the surviving officers tried to maintain relations with Humabon, hoping the alliance with Cebu would endure, but reality proved harsher. On the 1st of May, 1521, during a banquet arranged ashore, a signal from the hosts triggered a massacre. About 27 men were killed, including the commanders of the Trinidad and the Concepcion. Those still aboard managed to weigh anchor and leave the harbor in time. The ships were damaged, the crews exhausted, and the situation critical. They had no leader, no provisions, and no clear route. It was decided to burn the Concepcion, since there were not enough men to handle all 3 vessels. On the 2nd of May, flames took the empty decks, and the flotilla was reduced to 2 ships. Command passed to Juan Sebastián Elcano, a Basque and an experienced pilot who had not shone in earlier months but had kept his composure. He was chosen not for title, but for trust. He knew the sea, listened well, and spoke little. He proposed not to attempt a return across the Pacific, but to complete the mission, reach the Moluccas, purchase spices, and return home by another route, around Africa. In November 1521, the 2 remaining ships reached Tidore, one of the key Moluccan islands. Its Sultan, Al-Mansur, an enemy of the Portuguese, welcomed the Spaniards as allies. After concluding an agreement, the expedition was able not only to resupply, but to load both vessels with sacks of cloves, the East's most precious commodity. For about 1 month, the Victoria and the Trinidad lay at anchor, took on cargo, made repairs, and nursed the crews. When the time came to depart, a fateful decision was made. The Victoria would sail west across the Indian Ocean, while the Trinidad would attempt to return east across the Pacific despite her worn hull. The choice proved disastrous. The Trinidad, caught in a series of storms, lost her masts, began to founder, and in May 1522 was seized by the Portuguese garrison at Tidore. Her crew was taken prisoner. Many were sent to Malacca, some to Goa, and only a few managed to return to Europe years later. The Victoria, now the expedition's sole hope, left Tidore in December 1521, with a crew of 47 Europeans and about 13 Asian auxiliaries. Elcano chose a route across the Indian Ocean that kept the ship in open water to avoid Portuguese holdings. The voyage proved long, grueling, and seemingly endless. Winds died or rose to hurricanes, provisions spoiled quickly, water ran short, and disease, especially scurvy, spared no one. They entered neither Muscat nor Mozambique nor any other likely ports, fearing arrest. Only at Cape Verde, on Portuguese territory, did they land covertly, claiming to be merchants driven off course by a storm. The ruse was discovered, and part of the crew was detained. Elcano, not waiting for them, set sail. The ship was worn to the limit, and every delay could cost the remaining men their lives. On the 6th of September, 1522, at the end of a scorching Andalusian summer, the Victoria crept into the harbor of Seville. Of the entire expedition, which had begun with 5 ships and more than 200 men, only 18 Europeans and 4 Asians returned. They were greeted not by bands or crowds, but by wonder and quiet. Many had thought never to hear of the expedition again. The ship whose sails had been stitched hundreds of times and whose hull groaned at every breath of wind delivered to Spain about 26 tons of cloves, enough to cover nearly all the expedition's costs. But the most valuable cargo was not the sacks, but the men who brought back journals, charts, records, astronomical observations, and knowledge that had previously existed only as conjecture. The world is truly round, and it can be encircled. Thus ended a voyage begun under the Spanish flag, led by a Portuguese and completed by a Basque. Gaunt, aged, and silent, the survivors stood as living proof of the impossible. When the Victoria entered Seville on the 6th of September, 1522, the few who had endured 3 years of travel stepped ashore not with triumph in their eyes, but with weariness in their movements and quiet in their voices. Their bodies were emaciated, their faces scarred by scurvy, their motions slow, the motions of people whose existence had long depended on water in barrels and wind in sails. They did not return as heroes of song, but as witnesses to an event that forever changed humankind's understanding of its planet. Their arrival was not marked by fanfare or ceremony. They were met in the harbor by officials of Seville's House of Trade for the Indies and representatives of the Crown. First, they were placed under supervision to verify their accounts and assess the cargo. Then came hour after hour of interrogations, depositions, and route summaries, first for the trade boards, later for the imperial court. Juan Sebastián Elcano was summoned to Valladolid, where Charles V granted him a personal coat of arms bearing a globe, and the Latin motto, Primus circumnavigiste me. You were the first to encircle me. Along with this honor, he received a pension confirmed by royal decree. Yet Elcano's health was broken, and within a few years he died on another maritime campaign, again in the southern latitudes of the Pacific, not living to old age. Of the 18 returning Spaniards, many soon passed away, less from wounds than from illness, malnutrition, and inner exhaustion. Those who survived became, for many years, objects of interviews and observation. Some, like Francesco Albo, continued their seafaring careers. Others scattered, fading back into obscurity. One of the few to leave a detailed account was Antonio Pigafetta, the Venetian who had accompanied the expedition as a representative of a spiritual knightly order. Pigafetta had taken notes from almost the outset, and on his return shaped them into a continuous near-diary narrative. His manuscript, composed in Italian and later translated into French, became one of the most important historical sources for the Age of Discovery. Through his work, Europeans first received a systematic description of the peoples of the Philippines, the Moluccas, Oceania, and the southern sky. The geographical consequences of the expedition could not be measured at once, but in the decades that followed they became obvious. The globe, once populated by conventions and hypotheses, became a space that could be measured not only by imagination but by routes and coordinates. The ocean ceased to be an edge. It became a corridor. After the Victoria's voyage, it was clear. The east could be reached by sailing west. For Spain, the expedition was not only a symbolic victory over Portugal, but also an economic precedent. Although most ships were lost and half the crews never returned, the delivery of 26 tons of cloves in the Victoria's hold recouped almost all the costs. More important still was the strategic advantage, the opening of a route, perilous but possible, to the wealth of the East. The Portuguese, learning of the Circumnavigation's completion, reacted bitterly. The following year they seized the Trinidad and imprisoned her crew, later sending men to Goa. They intensified their naval patrols along the East African coast and secured from the Pope confirmation of their rights to the Moluccas. The conflict between the two maritime powers continued until the Agreement of Zaragoza in 1529, which temporarily demarcated spheres of influence. But the greatest change came not in diplomacy, but in worldview. What had long seemed theory was now proven in deed. The world map became coherent. A path existed. Long, exhausting, filled with death, yet real. It became a route for future explorers, merchants, scholars, and cartographers. Magellan's name, although he himself did not return, became the symbol of a voyage completed without him, but begun by him. His death on Mactan, his quarrels with the Portuguese king, his stubbornness, faith, and severity, all fused into the image of a figure whose influence outlasted his presence. His name was given to a strait in South America, to two star clouds in the southern sky, and, most importantly, to an idea that the earth is one and it can be traversed entirely. Magellan's expedition was not merely an event of its age, it was a watershed. Before it, the world was fragmented and notional. After it, it became measurable, passable, and connected by seas. It was not the end of discovery, but its point of no return.